excellent.
Welcome to the Mind Your Business podcast. Today is a special guest episode. We're talking to Steve Jaffe. Steve is the author of the book, The Layoff Journey. Steve has an accomplished 25-year career in advertising and marketing. You would probably recognize his work from the iconic "What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas." That's still a common phrase that many of you have probably said yourself. But even through all of his success, and he's had a lot, Steve has experienced the pain of layoffs and career changes, and he's working to help other people be able to navigate that in their own life. His book takes us through the 7 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, reconstruction, and renewal. Ultimately, he's giving us a roadmap to help us navigate job loss with both clarity and with purpose. It's going to be a great conversation, so I'm glad you're here. So welcome to the Mind Your Business podcast, the podcast for whatever business is on your mind. Let's get started.
Well, that's excellent.
Well, Steve, thank you for joining me for the podcast, man. I'm so excited about having you in the conversation today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I think we started this conversation back before the holidays last year, trying to get you on the podcast here. And I know that you're busy. You're doing a lot of these, and the book has had a lot of success. And I read it personally, and I'm really glad. The only complaint I have is that it's not signed. I wish I had an autographed copy, but that's the only complaint that I have. I really enjoyed the book. And when I read this, I thought, there's a lot of people that are probably struggling with this. And so I really was excited to get your insight to everyone who listens and watches the podcast. So first of all, Steve, just give us a little background about you. What an interesting journey that you've had professionally in your life and your career. And now you're using all that to help other people. So just tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it. It has been a long time coming. I'm really happy to be here. I am a advertising and marketing professional, been in that field for around 30 years, and started in advertising, worked on an iconic ad campaign, What Happens in Vegas Stays in Vegas. Brought that experience over to doing in-house marketing, various different industries, travel, tourism, hospitality, and then later in my career pivoted into technology and did SaaS and some other things. During that time, I underwent 4 different layoffs. My first layoff was spring of 2001, and my 4th layoff was the summer of 2023. First layoff, I was really devastated. It took me a long time to recover from. The last layoff, it really didn't affect me much. It was like water off a duck's back, and I sailed right through it. And upon reflection, I was thinking about, gosh, what a difference between these 4 layoffs. Like, I have learned a set of skills here that I think would be really valuable to transfer and translate to other people that have gone through something similar. So it was in that kind of light bulb moment that I thought this would be a topic of a book where I could really help some people. I could take everything that I've learned over these 4 layoffs and, to translate my 10,000 hours of becoming an expert in this and save someone the pain of, recovering from a layoff in years. And hopefully with my book, they could recover in a much shorter period of time, maybe a few months or something. So that's sort of my story arc in a nutshell. The premise of the book is framing the layoff around the stages of grief. There's so much now where when you get laid off, people just want to jump right into like, okay, I got to get another job. I got to go update my resume. I got to start interviewing. And it's people aren't stopping to take a pause to say, okay, wait a minute. I've been through a really traumatic event. A lot has been taken from me. I'm feeling a lot of grief right now. I need to process that before I get back out there and go on interviews and all these things. So that was where I saw an opportunity, because there's no book out there that talks about layoffs from the perspective of this is a grief event. Um, and like you said, I think it is resonating. I think people are finding it beneficial. And the kind of the bittersweet thing is layoffs now have become so ubiquitous. It's not a matter of if you're going to get laid off, but when. So there's a market for it, but I'm happy that I'm helping people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing I was thinking, Steve, as you were sharing just a little bit of your background and then reading your book as well. I thought, if this guy has gone through this 4 times, there's a high probability that many of us are going to experience this at some point, just because of your level of expertise, the broad strokes of your career, the things that you're involved in. And so you've experienced this, but you're turning it into something really good. And I do think we often think about position more than we think about the person. People, it's your livelihood. For many people, it becomes their identity, the job that
Yeah.
they do. It's who they
Yeah.
are, not just something they do. So
Right.
when that's taken away from you, it really has a lot of psychological, a lot of emotional, relational impacts to this. So I think that's why it's so important, the expertise you're bringing to this through your personal experience. This is not theory for you. This is experience. But
Right.
what I think is amazing is your connection to the stages of grief. So what was the aha moment for you? What part of your journey, where was it where you thought, wait a second, this isn't just about jumping to the next job. That's what you said. We're
Yeah.
all focused on getting the next one. We're not thinking
Right.
about our personal recovery. So what was that moment for you, that light bulb moment?
It was after that fourth layoff in 2023 when I was reflecting on kind of like how far I felt like I had come and the progress that I had made, and how, like, in the first layoff, like you said, I had defined myself through that job. I found my identity, my fulfillment, everything was wrapped up in that job. And when that was taken away from me, I had nothing left. Over time, I began to understand that, you need to develop a much more like holistic person beyond just like what you do. What you do is not who you are. Um, I started to take like better care of myself from a like mental health, spiritual health, physical health, so that when I was faced with difficult times like a layoff, I had a lot of like really good self care practices built up that gave me an edge when things like depression or pain or anger started to creep in. But when I started to think about, okay, I've somehow managed to develop this skill set. What exactly is this skill set that I've developed? And I started to research the concept for the book. The stages of grief that were created by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross back, I think it was in the 1940s, as she was observing terminally ill patients and how they were passing, and then how their loved ones were being affected by that. Um, I saw that framework as, this is a framework that people experience for any traumatic experience in life, whether it's the death of loved one, um, a divorce, a bankruptcy, certainly a layoff falls within that like traumatic life events.
Mm-hmm.
And we as humans tend to process trauma in this way, regardless of what that event is. And as I started to identify, okay, you know what? She outlines denial, anger, bargaining, negotiation, acceptance, uh, uh, resilience. These are things that I felt like I learned to work through, and I could identify them in each of my layoff experiences. And I was able to then identify how they affected me and how, the first time around I reacted versus like the last time around. And that became the premise of the book. And it was, that kind of roadmap is something I really could identify with, and felt like there was a lot of relevance for the layoff journey.
Yeah. So what was the impact for you there, Steve, when you began to really connect the stages of grief to what you were experiencing and had experienced in your career in these difficult moments. Was there this moment of, oh, I've been missing that? Was there this immediate relief, pressure that was taken off of your shoulders? What do you feel like the impact was on you personally when you really recognized what it was that you had been struggling with?
Finding this framework gave me like the sense that this is this roadmap exists, that it's not like this black box that you just are faced with a bunch of emotions and they're kind of random and they surface at different times, and you don't know what they are and you don't know how to expect or manage them. Having this framework gave me the sense that, okay, this structure exists. People deal with their grief in this way, and there's a process. There's a way of framing it where you not only don't feel alone, because people are managing grief in different ways on their own, all the time, and this just became the lens to say, okay, there's a framework, but then it's like the key to unlock how to manage and grow from and experience this trauma in a way that you can come out the other side, maybe being experiencing personal growth. So, like the first four stages, denial, anger, bargaining, and depression, those are some difficult stages of grief where you're doing some real heavy lifting. And those are some dark days. But as you turn the corner and you get into acceptance and reconstruction and renewal, there's kind of like this light at the end of the tunnel. And that's where the transformation happens. The intentionality of what your next step is going to be. You experience that personal growth in a way where you come out the other side, having built some grit and some resilience. So that framework really felt right for the idea that a layoff isn't a roadblock; it's a detour. Mm-hmm. And when you're in the middle of it, it can very much feel like a big giant roadblock that you cannot negotiate around. But this framework and the book is written in a way where it's a very practical exercise. It's very like there's a lot of practical tools and like exercises that you can do to help you get through these stages. And I think that that's what's real beneficial. Is it's not very esoteric. I'm not a PhD. I'm not writing from some medical degree. I've experienced it, and this is what I found to be really helpful.
Yeah, I love that. And that is what I really loved about the book. As a matter of fact, I consumed it in just a few days because it is not just informational, but it's transformational. It's taking real life stuff. I didn't feel like I was on some journey of psychology, even though it's educational, and I understood the very groundwork of the process and the emotions of going from a traumatic experiencing trauma to freedom from that. But you wrote it in such a way that it was just so practical. And at times I felt like I was sitting in your shoes experiencing it so I could put myself there. But you said something early on where you talked about discovering the 5 stages of grief and what we may typically apply that to: a death, some sort of what we would consider traumatic experience. But oftentimes something like a layoff, losing your job, was never included in that. And so the freedom of being able to understand that, hey, this is something that you need to grieve just like you would any other traumatic experience. But there was something that I just thought about your personal journey, at the success that you achieved and are on and have experienced in all the different sectors you've worked in. Something like, being a part of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. People still say that today. It's just a phrase you will hear people say. So my question is, do you feel like the experience of grief is greater or less than, depending on your level of success? So does this only apply to someone who's maybe reached the highest of heights, or does it still apply to someone who maybe isn't in their dream job or isn't doing, what they prefer to do, but it's their livelihood?
Uh, uh,
Regardless of the position, do you feel like it impacts everyone the same? Does this apply to everybody?
I think everybody feels grief. I think it does impact people differently based on their life experience. You may have one of these stages that is more difficult than another based on
Okay.
your background and your experience. Um, One of the things that I'll say is there's a story in the book about um, people who have um, never undergone like a difficult life experience or a challenge in life. This was from my own experience, like that first layoff that I had. I was very young. I was very early in my career. I hadn't really faced this type of a setback before, and I had no coping skills. I had no coping mechanisms. And that was something that I had to learn over time. There's a story about um, Navy SEALs. They do this thing called BUDS training where they're trying to become a Navy SEAL. There's a really rigorous, like physical, mental challenges that they get put through to weed out who can survive and who can't survive the recruitment process. And typically, it's like an 80% failure rate. It's a really, really high. And what the research finds is that guys who go in there who are like the star athlete, the first string quarterback who's had nothing but wins and touchdowns, never thrown an interception, never lost an important game that's on the line. Those guys, they don't have the skill set built up to deal with adversity and to deal with the challenges that they face in buds. And those guys tend to be the ones that drop out. The guys that stick around are the guys that maybe were on the losing team, that maybe threw the interceptions, that lost that game in the fourth quarter, because they built up the life experience to deal with the setbacks and the challenges. So that then when they face them in buds or in life, they already have that in their toolkit that they can draw from. I think that's the same thing for like what we're talking about here. You can be successful by whatever definition that is, or doing something that you're passionate about. And if you have like tenacity and grit and resilience in your toolkit that you can pull from, that's going to be the differential between how you negotiate this and come out of it on the other side. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I think that's missing a lot today. I think that the ability to just endure and to keep showing up. I often find the most successful people are people that just continue to show up.
Right. Right.
And they let every experience continue to build them. It makes them
Mm-hmm.
better. They
Mm-hmm.
don't stop. But one thing that we mentioned a few moments ago talking was about how a lot of people will identify their identity based on what they do. And I think that's why so many people get paralyzed at a loss, at a layoff, a setback, because they feel like they don't know who they are now. And so who they feel like they should be is no longer there because of their identity taken. So, what would you say to somebody who finds themselves wrapped up in that? How do you separate your worth from your work, and your identity from your, your job title or your status? What would you say to somebody to say, there's a better way?
Yeah, yeah. I think separating your worth from your work is one of the hardest and most important lessons that a layoff can teach you. We have so much tied up into our jobs. In social settings, people ask, what do you do? And that becomes the shorthand for who we are as this person. And we reduce it down to like a title in a company. Um, when we start seeing something, or when we start seeing our work as who we are, and not something that we do, it's a really slippery slope. But if you see that job, that 9 to 5 job, as maybe it's like the means to an end. It's one part of who you are, but it's not your entire person. Um, you know, the important thing is to separate your experience from like what you do. So, for example, if you have 25 years marketing experience working for consumer packaged goods, like that narrative is a narrative that you own, that nobody can take away from you, right? If you define yourself as a vice president of marketing for Kellogg's, well, you've reduced yourself to a business card, and the business card can get taken away from you. Um, but the important thing is that you build the whole person. It's very hard. I think like older generations, like Generation X, we put everything we had into our jobs, and we were there long, late hours, weekends. We gave everything we had, and there really was no work-life balance. Like that didn't exist. What I see younger generations doing is creating clearer boundaries around um, what they give to their employer. They're there maybe 9 to 5, and at 5 o'clock they reclaim their time and say, "That's now it's my time." And they have side hustles, and they build these things outside of their jobs, so that if the job gets taken away, that they don't lose their identity. They have a much more like well-rounded and robust person that's there. But you know, the ability to remove the identity from the job is a really crucial step in reducing some of that pain that can happen when that job gets taken away.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that you talk about is the leader's responsibility in that. You address the one who conducts the layoff and how much influence they have, and I think that's a part of a leader recognizing the impact that you're about to have on someone's life. And I understand things have to be done. I understand there's reasons for every decision that's made. And sometimes those tough decisions have to be made. But it's what my mom always said. It's not what you say, but it's how you say it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a right and there is a wrong. So speak
Mm-hmm.
to that a little bit, because a leader conducting this process can actually guard someone's worth and value in the
Mm-hmm.
process. You
Yeah.
can leave them better than you found them, even in difficult moments like a layoff. So
Right.
what do you think about that?
You know, a layoff is a no fault termination. You've done nothing wrong when you get laid off. You're a budget exercise where they're taking your salary and putting it to the bottom line because that's easier than increasing sales. So you're not being fired, right? You haven't done something that is like reflective of your performance. So anyone conducting a layoff should be very clear and reiterate in multiple ways. This is not reflective of your performance. This is a no fault termination. As such, you should be eligible for rehire. Um, and those are the things that somebody can take with them, where they don't feel like, gosh, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? What did they really think? What was the real reason why I got laid off? All these questions that you go around in your head with after a layoff that are never going to get answered, but eat away at your like self-esteem and your self-confidence. Um, so first and foremost, somebody should just really stress, like, listen, this has nothing to do with your job performance. Um, but secondly, companies work so hard to create like a culture, an office and a work and a company culture. And in my mind, I think that the clearest example of a company culture is how they handle layoffs, how they handle the communication, the like how they treat severance and all of the things that go along with the severance package, whether it's healthcare or maybe how they treat visas. Um, you know, those are true demonstrations of how they value their employees. And I talk to a lot of HR people, and HR people ask me a lot about like what's the best way to do a layoff, right? And the thing I communicate is, if your son or daughter were to come home one day from work and say, I just got laid off, how would you like that experience to go for them? How would you like them to be treated in that experience, right? Like with a lot of compassion and empathy, a lot of humanity, a support system, a support network. So, when you're thinking about what's the best way to do a layoff, well, think about, how would you like your son or daughter to get laid off? And if you do it that way, you probably will find some really good best practices.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that you just said, I think, so important about a culture of a company, highlighting the value of an individual and how healthy that is demonstrated a lot when they leave, even more so than when they arrive. And I think that's really good. I love that you said, to dismiss any confusion. Just be clear from the beginning, right? Because confusion creates, I always say, like, when you're confused, it creates chaos.
Yeah.
Chaos creates catastrophe, right? As you just let it build. But clarity can eliminate a lot of that. So just saying it's a no fault separation. It's a no fault termination. Hey, if the opportunity arises, we'd love to have you back. Highlight their strengths. Give them some challenge on the way out. Hey, here's some things to think about as you continue your journey. Empower that person. Send them off better than you found them. And I really think that's a lot of wisdom, Steve. One of the things you talk about as well is trying to fast forward past the grief. If you have just experienced this, you said we're often thinking about the next job, filling out the next application, updating our resume, getting on with it, which is important. Everyone has to work and we have to have the income. But talk about why it's so important that we don't fast forward through the grief.
Yeah. So if you don't process this, it's going to stay with you, and it's going to manifest in some unexpected ways that you really don't want. When you do land that job interview, if you haven't processed that anger, let's say, and that denial, and the hiring manager says, so tell me why you left your last job. This is going to be like an elephant in the room that you're going to have a really difficult time answering in a healthy way, right? You want to just kind of like try and minimize your layoff and move right past it and highlight the benefits and your strengths and what you can bring to the company. But if you have this kind of unprocessed trauma, your answer is going to be really messy, right? If they ask you in an interview, so tell me why you want this job, and you haven't processed what you've been through, that answer might be pretty difficult for you. But if you've gone through like that acceptance and reconstruction and renewal, where you've done some personal work to say, what fulfills me? What's my passion? What are my values? Where is my industry going? Where do I think I can contribute? And when you apply that then to the answer of why you want that job that you're interviewing for, you're going to have a much more like well-informed and robust answer where you can say, look, I may have just been laid off, but I love this industry. I love what I do. And I want to absolutely continue to pursue this path. You may find in that time of reflection that your industry is experiencing some contraction, whether it's from competition or AI or merger or acquisitions, and you want to pivot into a new field. When you get asked that question, you can honestly say, listen, the field I was in is experiencing a lot of contraction, and rather than stay in it and experience additional layoffs, I want to pivot into a new field where I think, the skills that I have are transferable, and I'm really passionate about, going down this new path. But the intentionality of those answers only comes from like healing and doing the work and processing what you've been through. So The kind of soundbite is, you want to heal before you hustle, right? So many people just feel like, okay, I got to get back in the game, and like action and momentum means progress. And so I got to update my resume and I got to get interviews. But you want to take a minute, take a beat, stop, pause, and let yourself feel some of these things. And if you do, you'll be much more successful on the other end when you are getting those interviews. The other thing I also like to, the one other reason I also add to this is, in these days, you're going to be out of work after a layoff, 6, 9, maybe 12 months, and you're going to send maybe like 200, 400, 500 resumes. You can get a lot of rejection. So before you add the grief and the trauma of that rejection on top of your layoff, process the grief from the layoff, develop those healthy coping skills, because you're going to need them when you start getting all those rejections from the interview process.
Yeah, I love that statement, heal before you hustle. That needs to be on a T-shirt and on your website. You need to go ahead and market that, because it's so good, and that is so true. Unhealthy people live unhealthy lives, and difficult moments are the greatest opportunity for any of us to grow. Mm-hmm. And I think any person, if they would stop long enough to take inventory of their life, would see that they grew the most, they learned the most, they became better through times of struggle and disappointment, more so than times of success. Mm-hmm. And so taking a moment to pause, to take that beat that you said, to heal before you hustle, I think is really, really an incredible piece of information for people. And it's freeing, because I don't think people often give themselves permission to slow down long enough to go through that process. And so to hear someone who's been through that and is framing this through all of the stages of grief, I think it gives a lot of permission for somebody to be able to do it. You also mentioned, having the coping skills, the ability to process and to be able to be resilient, because the process is not always easy. I think resilience is sort of a theme for you, Steve. I feel like that's a part of the core of your message. What does it mean for somebody to be resilient? What are the tools that you think is going to help somebody process all of the time before the next job comes, all the rejection that is ahead of them, having experienced the rejection of a layoff? Yeah. So help us with a little bit of resilience there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I do lean pretty heavily into resilience, and I agree with everything you said about life setbacks can be growth opportunities. And a layoff certainly is one that can be a foundational opportunity for personal growth. I think that some of this stuff is like small things that you can do each day that all collectively add up and create like, a healthy mind, body, spirit that gives you the self-esteem, the self-belief, the confidence to show up for yourself. So you want to think about this from the whole body standpoint of mind, body, and spirit. I believe in, whether it's a journaling or talking to people, having a network of support that you can turn to, some exercise, getting out physically, moving your body. There's a lot of natural chemicals that get released that help you fight things like depression, dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin. Those are really important, right? Check in with yourself. Spend a minute just kind of quietly giving your thoughts some time to examine and checking in and making sure which thoughts are healthy and which thoughts aren't serving you, right? What's really important here, if you can do it, is to find a gratitude practice. There's a lot that you've lost in a layoff. A lot has been taken from you. Obviously your salary, but probably your healthcare, your community, your daily routine, sense of pride and joy. There's a lot that you can focus on that's negative. And, I believe the one that grows is the one you feed. And if you feed that negative mental loop cycle, that's hard to get out of. But if you follow a gratitude practice and you think about what can I be grateful for today? What's going well? What are the small little things that I can celebrate? You can retrain your mind to be in more of a positive, healthy loop that can get you out of some of that negative thinking. Those are just a few things, but when you add all of them up and you do them each day, it helps you get through what is otherwise a really, really difficult and potentially negative experience.
I love it. An attitude of gratitude, that does. It changes every single thing. I was challenged in my own life, Steve, about how I respond to people when they say, how you doing? You know, you pass me, so how you doing? And people go, well, I'm tired, I'm busy, I've got so much going on. And it's people's typical responses. They go into this negative deep dive of their life. And it just one day I just said, you know what? I am more blessed than I deserve. I really am. You know, in the middle of anything, this attitude of gratitude, it sets the lens of my life, and I really am more blessed than I deserve, regardless of what season I'm in. And it really changes my outlook and how I approach my day, how I approach my life, and how I approach people. And I find that it's contagious when people go, oh, you are, you know, and tell me about that.
Right.
And so it's just so different. And so I love that you lean into that gratitude and being thankful, being grateful for what you have. I would guess that if someone is in a grief season, learning to process this grief, learning this resilience, the coping skills, they're probably in what you call the messy middle. And that's the messy portion between losing a job and finding a job. But you describe this as one of the most potentially creative seasons of someone's life. You really position this as a good thing, as an opportunity. And I think maybe if you've got the lens of gratitude, maybe you can see it. Help us understand that perspective, Steve.
Yeah, you know, we were talking earlier about when we're in the middle of those jobs and we're working long hours. You know, you don't have time to pause and take a minute and like take inventory. I'll never say that a layoff is a blessing in disguise because it's not. It sucks, right? There's not a lot of silver linings to layoffs, but they do give you that moment to take a pause, to in that space between what was familiar and what comes next. It can feel uncomfortable because there's a lot of doubts that lie ahead. But that's where reflection and some reinvention can become possible. As you start to think about, okay, just taking a minute here, is the career path that I was on fulfilling? Or did I get into it kind of by happenstance and I just continued that cycle? Does it align with my personal values and my passions and my joy? Does it bring me joy? Is it a means to an end? Is there something out there that you're passionate about that you want to pursue? Right? I mentioned earlier about being real intentional about where your industry is, and if your layoff was just what could be one of many if you stay in that field. You know, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting something different. So you may, if you try and get another job in that field, it just end up getting laid off again. So it may force a pivot, but it's the time to do that assessment. And it's the time to say, okay, if I were to pivot, where and how could I do that? Do I need to reskill, upskill, find transferable skills? Do I need to learn new skills? This is that pause that life is kind of handing you. It's not a pause that you asked for, but you can make the most of it and turn it into something where you come out the other side having a sense of renewal.
I love
I
that.
say,
It's a gift.
it can be,
Honestly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, look, a layoff is something that happens to you. But what you do next after a layoff is entirely up to you, right? You're in the driver's seat here, and there's a powerlessness baked into a layoff. But it's important that you regain your power and you use this as a time to do that self-discovery and self-examination.
Yeah. I think there's times in all of our lives we need a reset, but many of us won't slow down long enough to do that. And so this is a forced reset, if you will. But, many of us, we talked about this on an earlier episode of our podcast. Many people don't choose their job or their career chooses them.
Mm-hmm.
They land in something and they say, well, this is temporary. I'm just going to do this until.
Yeah.
And then, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and they're still in the same position, in the same place. And there's a dream out there of something different, but this is just what chose them. Yeah. And so for some people, this is an opportunity for them to reset and to choose again, to take control of their very own life. And so I love, not only are you helping people navigate pain, but you're giving people hope. I mean, there is so much that you shared, and I could talk about this forever, but we don't have time for that. But I do encourage everybody, go get a copy of this book because you're not going to be disappointed. And I will say this, even if you're not in the middle of a layoff, if this is not, quote, relevant to where you are right now in your career, this is still going to empower you to be able to navigate the difficulties that you're facing in a lot of areas of your life. And it's just in the lens of something we're all familiar with and have in common is our job. So I would encourage everybody to get a copy of this regardless. Steve, if we could just real quickly, just rewind the clock back for just a second. Mm-hmm. And let's say that your layoffs were still ahead of you. Mm-hmm. You haven't quite learned all of these lessons today. And you're about to take this journey. What is something today that you would love to tell yourself from the lessons you've learned? If you could go back in time and you could tell younger Steve, hey, look, this is what's ahead of you, but let me give you some advice to help you along the way. What is it that you would say? Because I believe there's somebody listening right now that is younger Steve that's taking their first step or is maybe sitting in that today, and they just desperately need a little encouragement or advice from you.
Yeah. I appreciate that. A layoff is not a personal failure. I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment. I felt like I had done something wrong. I felt like it was a declaration on like not only me as a person, but who I was. And it's not all of that. Don't give it all of that energy and oxygen. It's a life disruption. And it is difficult, but it's not a personal failure. You've done nothing wrong. The company is going through a difficult economic stage, and this is how they've chosen to manage that. So the emotions that you're feeling are a normal response to losing something important, right? This is worth grieving, and it's okay to grieve it. You should grieve it. You should take the time to process it. You give yourself the permission to feel it and to go through this. It's totally normal, and you're not alone, right? So you take the time to grieve. You'll regain your footing, and once you do that, you can move forward with greater clarity and resilience and intention.
Yeah. And the great news is you don't have to take it alone. You've got a great resource in Steve's book. Pick that up as you walk through the process. Steve, what an honor. Thank you for joining us today, for sharing so much of your story, your wisdom. And it's just been an honor having you a part of our conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And the honor is really all mine. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to thank Steve for joining us today. Be sure to pick up a copy of his book and then connect with him online. All of his links are there in the show notes. I also want to say thank you for tuning in to the Mind Your Business podcast. And of course, if you found this episode helpful, hit like so that YouTube will know, subscribe so that you can join the conversation, and then share it with a friend so that they can join us as well. And if you're listening wherever you get your favorite podcast, please leave a review because that would be so helpful. Until next time, go and mind your business.